Greetings and salutations, my fellow YouTubers. Once again, this is AP Darkness 905. Now, as promised in my previous Doctor Who video, the issue I'm going to talk about today is a Doctor Who spin-off, which I would like to point out before getting into it is in and of itself not a bad idea. And there are several of them out there, both done by Big Finish Productions and the BBC. But the problem with the television adventures is because a lot of them are extremely lacking, and one of the main reasons for this is because they are offshoots of the current series of Doctor Who. And as I pointed out in my previous video, the current Doctor Who series is fundamentally broken. It does not work. It is a major waste of time, and therefore any offshoots from that series are also similarly broken, and none more so than Torchwood. Torchwood is, without a doubt, one of the biggest wastes of time that the BBC ever sunk any amount of money or effort into. It is a travesty, because the logic of the series is fundamentally broken. It does not make any sense, because the problem with an organization that answers to no one is that if you are answerable to no higher power, that in turn means that there's no one to give you your authority. So the Torchwood team would have no more authority than your average person on the street. Like, if they came onto a crime scene and said, "Hi, I'm Torchwood. Could you get out of the way, please?" You know, the police officer would say, like, "Oh, Torchwood, is it? Yeah. I'm into harassing myself. Will you bugger off, please?" That's another thing. Is like the name Torchwood sounds like a porno mag. I know who came up with that name. It's terrible. Anyway, but getting back onto the logical issue, that's the reason why Torchwood doesn't work. Because at least with U.N.T, it makes sense. Because U.N.T gets their authority from the United Nations, or probably more accurately, they get their authority from the United Nations Security Council. So they have that power. They have the authority to walk onto a crime scene or some other situation, hold up a badge or a card or some kind of identification, and say, "We believe whatever's going on here falls under our jurisdiction. Could you please you people out of the way and let's do our job?" And Torchwood does not have that authority. They wouldn't have that authority because there's no one to give it to them. That's the first problem with this Torchwood. The second problem with Torchwood is, of course, we have the characters of Torchwood. Now, first of all, before I get into this, I'd just like to point out that I've got nothing against flawed characters in principle. In fact, I like flawed characters. I mean, they're more realistic in many ways, because we as humans are fundamentally flawed creatures. But the problem with the characters in Torchwood is that they're not flawed. They're completely and totally useless. They can't get anything done. They are constantly having to have, like, Captain Jack Harkness pull them out of trouble all the time, Every situation they get into, they screw up. And so I don't know why they even call it Torchwood. They may just call it the Jack Show and be done with it, because he's the one who does all the work. The rest of them just spend the whole time screwing around. So, like I said, that's another reason. The fact that the characters are a bunch of complete and utter incompetent cretins. And so, for those reasons, Torchwood, it really is, as I said before, just a waste of time. They may as well not even bothered, because it just doesn't work. It really doesn't. It's a waste of time, a waste of money, and a waste of, it's a waste of effort. They needn't have bothered, really. And then we come to the Sarah Jane Smith adventures. Now, I don't want to diss the Sarah Jane Smith adventures too much, because out of respect to the late, great Elizabeth Sladen, who I think, I speak for everyone who's a Doctor Who fan when I say that Elizabeth Sladen was a brilliant actor and an exceptional human being. Like, she was amazing. Her portrayal of Sarah Jane was second to none. She was a marvelous, marvelous person, and for her to go before her time the way she did is just beyond tragic. It is so sad. And and she is deeply missed by all of her fans and family and anyone else who knew her or watched her. They feel her loss. And so, therefore, I don't want to. I hate to have to diss the Sarah Jane Adventures, but sadly I do, because as with Torchwood, there are some problems with it. And those problems are as follows. I mean, first of all, there's the issue of Mr. Smith. Now, one thing I want to know is, where did she get this thing from? Where did you get the technology to build that? Where did you get the power requirements? How does the government not know about this thing? Because, she's got this huge monstrosity of a computer in this kind of bat cave she has in the attic. It's ridiculous. I mean, I know that Doctor Who requires a certain level of disbelief, but the beauty of the classic series is that it basically grounded that disbelief in a fairly steadfast amount of reality, so it made it more believable. But since the new series came along, it's like all that reality has gone completely out the window, and they just take it to these ridiculously over the top, unbelievable heights. And it's kind of like insulting a way to the audience. Like, oh, they'll believe whatever we feed them. It's like, yeah, my ass. Anyone who analyzes it can see that this takes time to actually really think about it and take a good long look at it, can see that the Doctor Who series and the subsequent spin-offs are, as I said before, fundamentally broken for that reason. And the other issue I have with Mr. Smith is, why does she need him? I mean, she's got K9 there. K9 Mark III was a gift from the Doctor to her, and he's like a mobile computer anyway. He's like a moving databank, as well as a guardian and constant companion and friend. So when you take that into account, why need Mr. Smith? You got K9 there. I like K9. I always like K9. I mean, yes, he can be a bit annoying. He's a bit of a know-all, but that's part of his charm. That's what makes him who he is. And so, like I said, Mr. Smith is largely superfluous for that reason, because she's already got a supercomputer. Why does she need another one when she's got one that can follow her around? And my other issue with the Sarah Jane Smith adventures is the fact that I don't know why they bother making them, because there was already a spin-off featuring Sarah Jane Smith anyway. Now, I'm not talking about K9 and Company. I'm talking about the Big Finish adventures, which was simply called Sarah Jane Smith. Now, these were a series of adventures that took place, that were produced in between 2002 and 2006, and if you haven't checked them out, if you haven't looked at them, I highly recommend you do so. They are really, really good. And they dealt with, frankly, they were much better handled than the Sarah Jane Smith adventures ever were. They were really good. It basically dealt with all kinds of really fantastic stuff. Like, you had Sarah Jane Smith going into space in the first space tourism flight. It had, the Sarah Jane encountering old enemies. Like, for example, one person she met was Hilda Winters, who was a character who was the head of the Scientific Reform Society, and she was in fact planning to take over the Earth in the story Robot, which was the first Tom Baker adventure. Now, her plans were ultimately thwarted and she was arrested, but she returned later on and made numerous attempts to destroy both Sarah Jane Smith and London. And so she was like a major nemesis for Sarah Jane. And that was a really brilliant story arc. It had some fantastic adventures. And so, why they didn't make the Sarah Jane spin-off in the TV series like that, I don't know. They could have just negotiated with the Big Finish Productions and have the live-action TV series be connected to that and continue where they left off. Because it had so many great stories, like ones I already mentioned. Also, she also met Will Sullivan, who's actually the stepbrother of Harry Sullivan, who was, of course, for a brief time a companion of the Doctor and an agent of U.N.T. Now, why they didn't do that is just beyond me, because it had so many great storylines and so many really good adventures, which I won't explain to you too much about them, because if you plan to check them out, I don't want to spoil this. I don't want to spoil it for you. But I'll just say that they had a lot of potential and they were really fun. And now, because of the Sarah Jane adventures, all that's gone. You know, you got Rusty Davis waltzing in there with that ridiculously bloated ego of his and just taking what was a good thing and crapping all over it. Basically pissing on it. Oh God, I swear to God, if I ever meet that man in person, I am gonna break that pug-like face of his. Rusty Davis, you, sir, are a worthless pile of crap. You are an asshole, sir. You. Oh. Sorry about that, everyone. I'll just regain some composure now. Anyway, back onto the issue at hand. Anyway, now, well, that's the problems. We talked about the problems of the spin-offs of the current series. So from the problems, we go to, well, the solutions, which I don't think there's any real way to fix them now, because you can't fix Torchwood, because Torchwood just does not work on any level, so you may just abandon that altogether. And as for the Sarah Jane Smith adventures, there's no fixing that now, because, as I said before, it's tragically Elizabeth Sladen is no longer with us. So that's another thing that can't be fixed. Instead, the only thing I can think of doing is looking to the future and doing another spin-off of Doctor Who. And the way I'd do a spin-off is I'd focus on U.N.T. Like, I'd make U.N.T the main organization instead of Torchwood, the focus of the spin-off series, because, as I said before, U.N.T makes a lot more sense. It's more logical, and the best part of U.N.T is that it's already got this wonderful backstory already set up, ready to be used. Like, it's like it had its origins in Doctor Who back with the Web of Fear. It became a full-blown organization in the Invasion, and ever since the Doctor was exiled to Earth, it had numerous adventures with the Doctor and his multiple enemies. And so, when you have such a fantastic background as that, to not take advantage of that would just be ludicrous. And why they didn't do that to begin with is just beyond me. It just shows that Rusty Davis has got a major problem when it comes to judgment. The guy does not know what he's doing. He wouldn't know a good thing came up and bit him in the ass, frankly. Anyway, as I was talking about U.N.T, like I said, I'd do the story pretty much about that organization, and then the subsequent adventures that result from that. As for how I do the series, well, I'll look into that now. I think what I do is I adopt probably the only good thing that there was about Torchwood, which was the team dynamic. What I have the story focuses on is probably an offshoot of the scientific research division of U.N.T. Like, these guys are not necessarily soldiers; they're actually like undercover operatives in a way. Their job is to go into a situation wearing plain clothing. They don't wear uniforms, and they assess the situation, see if it's genuine or not, whether it's like extraterrestrial or some kind of unusual activity, and if there is something actually going on, then they call them the big guns, really. So there's essentially like an undercover research and assessment team. And obviously I'd have to have a main character who is probably new to all this, because you need someone to act as a kind of a guide, like Virgil in Dante's Inferno. It was a guide to Dante throughout Dante's Divine Comedy. You need someone to lead you into that, because in Doctor Who you have the companions. Like, whenever the Doctor gives some ridiculously over-the-top explanation that would just baffle Einstein and every other physicist that has lived since then, you need someone to ask the question that to get the Doctor to dumb it down. Otherwise, you'd have no idea what's going on. And so the new character would fill that role. Now, for some reason, when I pitch this character, I don't know why, but I picture a female character in the lead. I don't ask me why, because I'm not sure, but for some reason I picture a woman, a young woman in this role. And she's someone who is not in the military, and she does something to get the attention of U.N.T. I'm not sure what it is. It could be something illegal, or maybe it could be just some other factor that draws their attention to her, and it leads to them offering her a job. A bit like Gwen in Torchwood, only this character be much less useless than Gwen. God. Let's not go into that character now. I'll just focus on what I'm talking about now at the moment. And the reason why I'd have a newt is because it would enable the audience to discover U.N.T and how U.N.T operates along with her. They follow her on her journey. And she guides us in and guides us through how U.N.T works, what they do, and all this, and introduces to the other characters. And it would also enable the show to reference some really good homages to the original U.N.T and also to the Doctor Who series when the Doctor was there at U.N.T. Like, for example, I can picture this moment where she first is taken to the U.N.T headquarters, and maybe this is a moment where she goes to this large, huge, almost warehouse-like garage, which is full of all these vehicles, like these military vehicles, like jeeps and vans and whatnot. And then, down the back, probably in one of the corners at the very back of the garage, she notices this large tarpaulin. She goes over to it, pulls it off or something, and there, standing side by side, is the Doctor's two cars, Bessie and the Whomobile. Because I personally love those two cars in the original series. Like Bessie was like this wonderful old car that the Doctor basically really amped up. He put all this really ridiculous advanced technology into it, and for the reason that he said it's a car of great character, I was very lucky to get her. Which I couldn't agree more, frankly. And then, of course, there's the Whomobile, which is a vehicle that he built, which is even more advanced than Bessie, because the Whomobile can actually fly. As for how it does, it probably does with a combination of, I don't know, thruster, some kind of thrust power with anti-grav units of some kind. I'm not sure what the specifics, but it works. It just works. And to reference those two vehicles in the U.N.T spin-off would be fantastic, because I remember thinking they must still be on Earth, because what would U.N.T do with them? I mean, how would the Doctor take them with them? Take him with him? He wouldn't be able to, so he'd have to leave them on Earth. And so I like the idea of the Doctor leaving these cars back at U.N.T headquarters, so he always has something to drive if he ends up working with U.N.T again for whatever reason, And plus, I'd also love to have a moment at some point in the U.N.T spin-off where somebody actually flies the Whomobile, actually gets to that thing and takes off. That'd be really, really awesome moment, I think. I'd love to see that happen. And then, of course, there's other factors from the original series you could also tie into. Like, I kind of imagine this moment where the main character is being led through some kind of lab, and it's a bit like a Men in Black moment where she sees all this technology that U.N.T has basically gotten a hold of in their various encounters with alien life. Like, for example, there could be the smashed remains of a Dalek from the story The Day of the Daleks, where this whole house was blown up with them inside of it. Maybe the U.N.T salvaged some of the bits and pieces from the wreckage. Another thing could be the remains of bits and pieces of a Yeti from the Web of Fear, and maybe even some Cyberman fragments from the invasion. Or there could be like a scene where she sees this tank, which is like a large glass tube, which has got the preserved remains of a Zygon, and it could be the body of Broton, who was the warlord of the Zygons in the story that appeared, like the Terror of the Zygons, And having those moments where the show references all these all these past adventures would just be fantastic, in my opinion. I'd love to see that. That'd be a wonderful homage to both both the unit and the classic series of Doctor Who. And there could always be a crossover with Doctor Who. Like, the Doctor could return to Earth, and for whatever reason, he ends up having to work together with the new unit team, and so he gets to know them. He gets to know who they are, and make some acquaintances, some friends, and maybe some enemies. Like, maybe there's some characters in unit that don't really like him that much, and so they kind of become adversaries. I find that a fascinating idea. As for who the specifics of the who the new unit team would be, I have no idea on that front. Although there are a couple of casting choices I'd like to talk about. The first of which is, if I could get him, I'd love to get Idris Elba to play the Brigadier, because I think he can play that really strong, steadfast leader that Nicholas Courtney was so good at. Like, he can do that, but he's actor enough to take it and make it his own without doing a dead rip-off of the original Brig, which I think would be fantastic, and I think he'd be just perfect for that role, because he displayed that ability in the movie Pacific Rim, where he played his role in that fantastically. So I think he'd make a great Brigadier. The other person who I think would make a really good Brigadier would be Colin Salmon, because like Idris Elba, he has the ability and he has the range to play that kind of a character. Like, he's the kind of guy who can play the kind of character who comes in there, surveys the situation, works out what needs to be done, and he does it. He takes charge and he deals with it. And that is a quality you absolutely want for someone in the Brigadier, because that's what the original Brig had, played by Nicholas Courtney, and you'd want that for the new unit team. And so I'd get either one of those guys to play that character if I could get them, because they're both really talented actors. They both have the ability to play that character well, and they're both British actors. So what more do you want? You got exactly what we need right there. So either one of those guys would be fantastic in the role of the Brigadier. As for who I'd cast as the rest of the unit crew, I have, as I said before, I have no idea. I'd have to hold a casting call for that. But I think this as a spin-off series, I think Unit would have the best potential of succeeding and actually being a worthy spin-off to Doctor Who. Of course, other than the potential that I've already talked about, there's also the possibility of having old enemies from the original Doctor Who series that Unit face come in there. Like, there could be a moment where they face the Daleks, or the Cybermen again, or who knows, maybe even the Great Intelligence with its Yetis. Maybe that thing comes back. Or there's also the possibility of the Master returning, because the Master was like appeared in many of the Unit stories, and he was a major thorn in their side. So, the idea of him coming back, only now they have to face him without the Doctor's help. So essentially, they're up against a Time Lord who's just as clever and just as resourceful as the Doctor, but unlike the Doctor, he's hell-bent on their destruction, and that idea would be pretty terrifying, I think. Because they would be in trouble. They would need help big time. Unfortunately, wouldn't be there, so they have to deal with it themselves. And that would be a really great story. And I think maybe that story would end with a casualty. Probably they'd defeat the Master, but it would come at a terrible cost. Like, they'd lose a valued colleague and friend in the process. And then there's also the option of having other rival organizations in there. Like, for example, in the Big Finish production, there was a organization called ISIS. Now, when I say ISIS, I don't mean the warmongering psychopaths who have murdered God knows how many innocent people around the world. I don't mean Islamic State. I'm not talking about those warmongering animals. No, I'm talking about the ISIS, which is spelled ICIS, which stands for International Counterintelligence Service. And this is basically like an organization which is very similar to UNIT, Only, whereas UNIT is a global organization because they're funded and controlled by the UN, ISIS is only concerned with homeland security. Like they only deal with threats on British soil, and they have very little, if any, interest in global matters. They only deal with like organizations which are homegrown. I'd like to have an organization like that, but I think I would change the name to avoid association with the actual ISIS organization, because the ISIS group, because frankly, I don't want to have any connection to those maniacs. You know, I mean, who would? I mean, yeah, little lunatics. You know, I would potentially think about changing the name. I might keep the name the same. I don't know. It just having a name of such a contemptible terrorist organization and sharing it, having it pronounced the same way, would be a potentially controversial decision. So that's a hornet's nest I'm not sure I want to kick. So I consider renaming it. But ISIS was a really good villain for like a unit, because they cause a lot of trouble. Like they basically, because they do the same thing for unit, but because they have fundamentally different reasons for doing what they do, they would often butt heads. And ISIS ultimately turned into a rogue organization. Like when certain events took place in the Big Finish productions, ISIS went basically attempted a coup and actually tried to take over the government. So essentially, they went way too far, and well, then they became an illegal organization, and ultimately, like ended up like trying to overthrow the government. Now, the details as to how they actually went about doing this, I won't mention those, because, like I said, as with like the Sarah Jane adventures or the Sarah Jane audio adventures in Big Finish, I don't want to spoil them for you. If you want to check out the Unit spin-off series in Big Finish, by all means do so. It is a good series, and I think you'll like it. Although it's more about political intrigue than it is about alien invasion. So be aware that if you're expecting the same thing as in Doctor Who, you might be a bit disappointed. But it is worth checking out. But yeah, I think that would have a lot of potential. So, in essence, what I've been trying to do with my spin-off series is I try and basically capture the same feel or a similar feel that Unit had when they were cooperating with the Doctor back in the third Doctor's reign, when he was exiled to Earth and he became their scientific advisor. I like the idea of like trying to recapture that same feel. Like it's a group of people, a tight knit group of people work together and they deal with similar threats to the Doctor do, as well as like probably having some political intrigue in there as well. So it'd be a bit like Doctor Who meets the current James Bond, like with uh, Daniel Craig, because as I'm sure some of you, pretty much all of you, are aware, Daniel Craig's adventures are somewhat more downplayed from previous incarnations of James Bond. Like Roger Moore, for example, he had these ridiculously high-tech gadgets, and dealt with some really insane stuff. Like it was even they even had a space battle in Moonraker, for heaven's sake. Whereas like Daniel Craig's James Bond, he deals with more down-to-earth threats, and I'd have Unit deal with stuff like that. Deal with people like maybe terrorist organizations which have gotten hold of alien technology. So you have organizations like the Doctor Who world's equivalent of Spectre, who basically plan to, I don't know, obtain alien technology and rule the world through it. I mean, and it's up to Unit to basically stop them. That'd be great. I'd love to see stuff like that. That'd be a really good story, I think, and I think really entertaining and a lot of fun. So yeah, that I'm trying to cultivate that same feel, that same like the same essence that Unit had when Doctor Who was basically very much concerned about Unit, and was Unit was a regular fixture of the show. But yeah, rounding up now, that that's my opinion of the current spin-off series Doctor Who, and that's also how I would do a spin-off series if I was put in charge. So if any of you got any questions or comments, by all means feel free to leave them. I'd love to hear from you. And well, that's pretty much all I have to say on this subject. So until next time, this is AP Darkness signing off.